Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, somehow, some way, this person is a first-time guest. I've long admired him from afar, and for one brief season that ended abruptly in a pandemic, I got to share the workplace with him, covering the Knicks in person a few times, like a handful of times, and seeing him work up close was really a treat, and also quite a learning experience for someone who has been continually trying to make their way in this weird world of ours covering the NBA and the Knicks. Newsday's Steve Popper. Hello, sir. How are you?
Nice to see you. Good to be here.
Thank you for coming on. I really don't know how it's been this long. What are we, like 600 something episodes in, and you are. Correct me if I'm wrong. You are the senior Knicks beat writer at the moment, right? Because a certain someone is no longer has that on their current resume.
Well, first of all, the first 590 or something, I think I told you I'd come on when they were good, when things got good, and it took a while.
That's the reason.
I am. It's a way of saying I'm old, and I actually did the Knicks before Berman. I took an 8-year kind of hiatus in the where I was doing baseball and general column. For the record. Recruited by Woj over there.
Really?
Yeah, he was our general columnist at the Record and a good friend of mine. So followed him over there and did baseball and then columns and some other stuff. Did basketball there too. But yeah, it was. My first Knicks coverage was the 1990 playoffs before most were born, with John McLeod coaching. But covered the NBA Finals in '94. That, but really, came back to cover the Knicks full time 2011.
Yeah, because I remember. I'm just going backwards. I remember when you went to like the lead sports person for all of the Record, and then but that didn't last long because then you went over to Newsday, right? Not too long after that.
Yeah, I did. I thought I would never be on the road again. Never. It's sort of that they dragged me back in, just when I thought I'm
out. Well, there's no better person to talk about this team in general. I'm especially excited to pick your brain now because you've seen so much and you've been around the Garden. And I feel like, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I feel like the Garden is someplace like, and again, I know like 0.1 of 1% to the extent of what you do, but like until you're there every day and you kind of see how it operates and you get a feel for what it is to be in those walls, you can't really tell like what's really going on. And I feel like you have a better feel than just about anyone. And you've seen some highs and you've seen a lot of lows. So I'm just curious, right now, as you're kind of thinking about this year with the Knicks, like how do you grade like the pulse of this team at the moment?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say, as far as what it's like to be around the Knicks, when they're good, this as somebody who's created an industry here out of being a fan, it's an amazing place, an amazing fan base, for all the craziness that happens there. The loyalty is overwhelming. I did, as I mentioned before, I covered the Mets for a while, and there were times, August and September, it would be, the place with the shortest line for a Shake Shack in New York. And that was like the what you go there for. The Garden is never that. The Garden is every night can be something special and amazing. And, whether, Linsanity pops up out of nowhere or, just things happen there at the Garden, and it's a special night. Players from opposing teams treated as someplace special. So it always is that, no matter what problems there are at the top. And so I think this year, it kind of was, it was a throwback year in the way that they were regarded by the fan base. That Game 3 against Cleveland, the first postseason game here, was one of the great atmospheres I've ever felt there. I'd put it up there with Linsanity, with the game after the fight against Miami in '97 was a great atmosphere. And this was like that. It was loud. And it was just you could tell it wasn't the tourist crowd anymore, and it wasn't the business suit crowd. It was the Knicks fan crowd there. So I thought this year seemed to capture it. And I think that's because of what they are. They're not, a superstar team. They're a good team of good, hardworking guys. And some of them you hate on certain nights as a fan base, and they want to get Julius out of town. They want to get RJ out of town. But these guys are hard workers, and everybody loves Brunson. Everybody loves Josh Hart. I think what they are is the kind of team that New York fans like.
And you couldn't have said it better. We talked all season long about where this team ranked in terms of, from like our perspective as fans. Not forget the 90s. The 90s were its own animal, and it was never just one season. It was it was a decade, and really longer than that if you go for how long Ewing was here. But like we would go back to like the We Here season, which was kind of weird because it was tied into the pandemic and like that whole thing. And then we eventually, towards the end of the year, we began just comparing it to 2012-13, which you again had been, back covering them for a few years. Yeah. I'm gonna put you on the spot. If you had to compare the 2 years, which do you think kind of, I don't know, stands out more or was more emblematic of like, when you think of New York basketball, like you think of this?
I think this team was more a team that the fans loved because that team, first of all, there was a very mixed reaction in New York, I think, on Carmelo. I loved covering him. I thought he was a great player, a great talent. He had a great season. But all those guys around him were sort of like guns for hire, aging guys at the end of their career. This team, again, whether you love them or not, RJ Barrett is their guy. Mitchell Robinson's their guy. Brunson is basically family to this team. And Julius Randle, again, for what people may feel or not feel about him, he's the guy who took the money to come to New York and stand there as a star. I know everybody wants to run him out of town, but if you told somebody, 4 years ago, you're going to get a guy who's going to be all NBA twice in the next 4 years, I think they'd be excited to take that, and at a reasonable price.
Oh, very reasonable. I agree. And it's, I think you hit on it, like, and I don't even think you mentioned like Quickley and like Grimes, like, the fact that these guys were, and Obi, that they were drafted by the team. And it's funny you mentioned Brunson and Randall, because obviously those guys came as free agents, but in a way, doesn't it feel like Julius Randle has almost always been a Knick? I know he was a Laker for 3 years and a Pelican for one, but
right. It's amazing. He became Julius Randle here, I think. Yeah, because this was the time where he was given the ball and he was the guy, and he was he was not an All NBA player. He was not an All Star in those other places. He kind of grew here, and look, I think he was a rental when he came here. I think the thought was same as it was with Marcus Morris and Bobby Portis. These are pieces that we couldn't get what we wanted, and we're going to flip these for different pieces, which is not a bad fallback plan. And I think there wasn't a great market for him the first year. And I think the thought was the second year he's going to be traded before the deadline. And he turned out to be an all NBA player. We became a leader of the group, and got an extension out of it, got everything. To me, he is a Knick right now. And I think he probably will be for the foreseeable future.
I think he will be too. And that's the first kind of really basketball thing or team specific thing I was going to ask you about is Randall, because you're right. A lot of people, I think, after the playoffs, and honestly, if I'm keeping it a buck here, it started before that, but because I know you remember the games before the ankle injury, the original ankle injury, against Miami, there was, okay, here's one technical. Oh, next game, another technical. Next game, another technical. And now we're pushing Immanuel Quickley. And it was like all of the bad, all of the bad juju, no pun intended, from last year was like starting to creep. And I know just for me, again, as a fan, like I got on the podcast at one point earlier in this year. I forget, Randall had one of his crazy good games. And I said, listen, whatever happens from here on in, this is our guy, man. We got to, he's our guy. He's earned that. And it's amazing how quickly you want to start to go back on it when you see him revert back to some of the other stuff, which is why, and this is a kind of an unfair question, but you've been around long enough, so I could throw you an unfair question. When you when you're thinking about how the franchise is looking at Randle, and I agree, he's not going anywhere. How do you think that they kind of parse out the basketball part of it with the, I feel bad calling it volatility, but like, let's call a spade a spade. He's someone that kind of goes off the handle sometimes. Like, how do you think they look at him as a player, as a person, like, and all that comes with all that?
Well, I'll say this first of all, if you know Julius, and as much as we in the media are allowed to know him, but talking to other guys who know him well, he's a smart, personable. He is not a hot-headed, fly off the handle guy. He is, as much probably as Jalen Brunson, a leader of this team. And,
really?
and he's, I don't think he's got that in the locker room that way, but he is a voice that is not, again, he's not regarded as, Dennis Rodman. What's this guy going to do next? He's thought of as an intelligent, basketball smart guy. And I think that's how the team views him. They know him, obviously, they've known him, since Kentucky, some of these people here, sure. Through being his agent, or, recruiting him to Kentucky. They've been lifers with him, and I think they know what he is and like it. And I think, I hear rumors sometimes that, he's not beloved in the locker room sometimes because of some of these things that happen. It's just such an odd thing the way it happened. Last year there was, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, and we forget these guys are human and they're not machines and they're not just a statistical analysis. And we don't know what troubles they have, off the court in their personal life, what someone is in their ear telling them. Julius is a guy who was beloved 3 seasons ago. Last year, 2 years ago, to then, he's struggling. He looks, the body language is bad and fans are kind of turning on him and he turns on the fans. And, how that accelerated that is still something I don't understand. And then for him to talk about it so openly this year before the All-Star break and, when he became an All-Star again, he really thoughtful about it, what he knew, what he had to, how he had to come out of it, what he had to do, body language, and not for us, not for the fans, for his teammates. And then to revert to it again, as you said, and, the temper stuff with the referees, and it's hard to understand how it becomes that. And look, I think he knows, and we all know where he's going to hear it all summer if he turns on any social media after the playoffs, whatever the reasons were, if it was the matchups, if it was the injury, whatever it was, he's going to hear that he failed again in the postseason. It makes it a tough spot for him. He's a hard guy to figure, but I think they regard him, front office, coach, and I think on the court they regard him as more than his numbers. One of the things that Thibodeau loves in his setup is, can you draw two defenders? Can you create openings for other people? And that's basically the Julius versus Obi thing. Obi is a super talented athlete. You look at him, and this guy led the nation in scoring, but Obi doesn't create a double team ever. No. Julius creates a double team all the time. And, does he always pass properly out of it? Maybe not. But
better though.
He is, and sometimes it's the guys who are catching the ball or costing him assists. But what he does, the 25, 10, and 4, is something that not a lot of guys in the league can do. He can be, should he be your number one? Probably not. Should he be your number 2? Maybe. It'd be great if there was a superstar with Brunson and Randle beside him, but that's the chase for last summer and this summer.
I was about to say, no need to beat around the bush. You brought it up. So it's interesting because I feel like it's been forever that this even before this regime came aboard. I mean, and honestly, even before Mills, you could argue there was. There's always this lore. I mean, go back to Donnie Walsh with, the chase of LeBron James. And I know he eventually got Amari and Melo, but like this, okay, when are we going to get the guy? When are we going to get the superstar? And the biggest thing I'm trying to wrap my head around going into this summer is there doesn't feel like there's a sense of urgency necessarily, but at the same time, I do think that there is an acknowledgement, even for like the biggest diehards, that there's, something of a ceiling on this team as currently constructed. And, I know as well as anyone, the new CBA restrictions on, it's not a hard cap, but it's essentially a hard cap. And, the Immanuel Quickleys of the world and the Quentin Grimes of the world, these guys are going to get more and more expensive. So in your estimation, like, do you think that they are operating from a position of strength, or do you get a sense that, I'm talking about the front office, do you get the sense that maybe they are feeling like, okay, we're not going to be desperate, but we're going to be every bit as keen on seeing what opportunities are out there as we ever were?
Well, I'd split it two ways. One, I think there was some desperation early last season that Thibodeau was on a hot seat, and I think some in the front office probably knew that they might be too. But look, what they did turned out pretty well, and gives you, I know fans will say sometimes you guys are negative in the media. I'm actually probably more positive about this team than most fans are, because I think they're in a pretty good spot. They have their stars, who I think are all reasonably priced guys. They're young. They have a ton of assets. But I don't see. I know something always pops up. Right now, I don't see anyone who you're thinking, let's give up all our assets to get this guy.
No, I don't either.
But that said, I think they do have to decide on moves. I think they know what the cap is going to be. I think they know, what the contract situations are. I wouldn't be surprised if Obi's moved this summer for a draft pick or something like that, where you save money, you go cheaper into the future. I think they've got to make a decision on Immanuel quickly. And I think, as painful as that decision may be, it may be that he wants to be a starter somewhere. He maybe deserves to be a starter somewhere. He wants to be paid like a starter, and he's never going to be a starter here. So do they pay him that 20-something million a year, extension, or do they move him when his value may never be higher than it is right now, coming off runner-up as sixth man of the year? I think they've got to make those decisions. I think they've got other pieces. I think RJ Barrett is going to be available in a deal. Again, a reasonably priced contract for a guy. But I'm sort of like, when we talk about what this team is and where the front office has them, I don't know that I'm so quick to trade RJ Barrett, as much as we see his flaws, and maybe maybe this is what he is and he's never going to get better. But a part of me is like, he's turning 23 this summer. He's averaging 20 a game. He has the potential to be a very good defensive player. He took a step backward, obviously, this season. I know they love Quentin Grimes. Like, could I see them going forward another year just as they are? Absolutely. But I think they've got to think into the future, the cap space, the contract situations. And I think that may push them to maybe package, you package a Quickley and a draft pick along with Fournier's deal or Derrick Rose's deal. And you get maybe a slight upgrade of a player, that 3-for-1, or, if it's Rose's contract that somebody could just throw away, if you do it before the deadline. I think there are moves to be made here, but I don't think it's the last summer. How far can we go into our assets and get Donovan Mitchell? I don't see that right now, and it may pop up. Somebody may say they want out and demand a trade, and I think they're ready and listening. And I think they don't want to be caught in this situation last year, where I think DeJounte Murray caught everybody in the league a little bit by surprise.
Really?
I think teams felt that was sort of the connections between Atlanta's front office and San Antonio's front office. I don't think people expected that deal to go down the way it did. I think a lot of teams would have liked to pay that price for him. Does Shai Gilgeous-Alexander become available at some point? Maybe, I don't know. But do you give everything you have for Bradley Beal? I don't think so. Just not the timeline with everything else you have here.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Beal. I wrote about Beal actually today for the newsletter, and I'm like, you look at the price tag, you look at the age, you look at the fact that he's missed 25 games a year now for the last 4 years. And I've talked to Fred, your your colleague Fred Katz about this several times about how Beal, he led the league in games played for a couple of consecutive seasons, and it seemed like that was a real point of pride for him, and maybe let that get the better of him, or he maybe tried to play in some instances where he shouldn't. But like, what do you, in this NBA economy, I'll call it, like, what do you give up for a guy who, when he's healthy, I think Beal still, you could argue he's a top, let's say 20 player, maybe top 15 if you want to push it. But at the number and at the age, it's like if you're the Knicks, maybe you give up some players, but you probably don't want to give up a whole lot in terms of draft assets, or do you want to keep the players and give up the draft? It's like, I feel like Beal's just one name, but so many of the names that I feel like we're going to hear this summer are ones that you could ask these similar questions. Like, how much do you really want to give up for that guy? How much do you really want to give up for that guy? Do you get the same kind of read on the league right now?
I do. And I also think with the Knicks, I think, as much as he may have been in trouble early last year, I think Tom Thibodeau has a huge voice in this front office. And one thing he loves is guys who are available. That's why he loves Julius and he loves RJ. He loves Jalen, because, you basically have to cut off a limb for them to take off. That's a huge value to him. And to have a guy who's not there, I know that, I hear from people, close to him. I don't hear it directly from him, but, hear that, when he sees somebody out in the playoffs, he's sort of got that Pat Riley, could you give me one minute if you had it, one possession?
The Charles, was that a Charles Smith story?
Yeah, the Charles Smith. Can we curse on here? But that was the Charles Smith thing. Yeah. I think Thibodeau is of that mind. Get dressed, get ready, give us what you got. We'll go to the next guy when we have to, but if you can be out there for us. And I don't think he loves seeing guys who sit 25 games a year.
It's funny because the day before I wrote about another guy who sits about 25 games a year, Kristaps Porzingis, and actually 25 is probably a little light for him. Real quick, because you brought it up and it got me thinking. I think a lot of fans. I'm a big Thibodeau guy, just so you know, in case you haven't heard. A lot of fans. Are you?
I am. I
worship.
I advocated for hiring him, and think he's changed the culture there. And people will critique his offensive game plan or whatever. But I'm like, you're a contender now. You were a joke before he got here. You are a team now that guys want to come play for. And part of that is Thibodeau. Part of that is Jalen Brunson. Josh Hart looks like he's never been happier in his life. And I think it's a little bit of both of them. And look, we say what we say about Julius Randle, but more than once this year, he said something and we're like, you sound like a Thibodeau puppet. And he's like, he says that, doesn't he? And he just, he repeats Thibodeau. He's heard it for 4 years. And I think, as I said, I think he's got a big voice in the front office. I think I've heard from multiple people. Quentin Grimes was his draft pick, that he really had pushed from. That McBride was the same. He wants a certain kind of guy, and he's done a good job of getting those guys here. Again, he absorbed the slings and arrows for Cam Reddish, but I challenge people to say this: who's a young player that Thibodeau didn't play and went somewhere else and flourished? I don't think it's ever happened.
No, and there's reason for that. So my question about Tibbs, because again, you know better than anyone, because I feel like he gets the brunt of it, and it is like we know how Tibbs is, and I think there's been this constant, like anytime a guy plays too many minutes, or like last season it was like, why is Julius still playing down the stretch of a lost season? We want to see Obi Toppin, the whole thing. Do you think the front office is how do I put this? Are they like complacent in letting Thibodeau be Thibodeau? Do they love the fact that Thibodeau goes full Thibodeau? Is there maybe a little bit more push and pull than we realize? Like, how do you think? I guess I'll just ask, how do you think that relationship is right now between Thibodeau?
I think it's great. I think they're successful. I think some of the voices in the front office that may not have been advocates for him have kind of been pushed down, because how do you argue with success? And look, we hear this all the time. The play too many minutes, but again, Knicks players don't sit because they're tired or fail because they're tired. Julius Randle had a freak ankle injury 5 games left of the season. guys turn their ankles. I look at other teams, where guys are load managing. I mean, the Clippers have load managed Kawhi Leonard for seasons now, and it seems like I play as many NBA games as he does. I don't see where the science, and this is what Thibodeau says. Where's the science that tells you that sitting a guy, back-to-back games, or sitting him 20 games helps you down the stretch? There isn't a science that shows it. It's, his guys are ready to play 48 minutes. And, you look at, again, we talk about Julius Randle. After the second ankle injury, he was averaging, I think, 37 minutes a game the last 5 games of the Miami series. He gets in there and he plays, gives you everything he's got. I think, Jalen Brunson, will play 47 minutes a game. I don't think, the ankle injury to Quickley was because he played 50 some minutes, earlier this season. It's because Bam Adebayo dove into his leg.
Yeah. Oh.
And that can happen in the first minute. It can happen in the last minute. And, there's just I just don't see any evidence that Thibodeau playing guys minutes has hurt them, unless you're saying Derrick Rose a million years ago that had something to do with it. And I don't know.
I'm curious because you bring it up, the Clippers thing, and there's the most obvious example, but there's other examples throughout the league.
Sure.
I wonder, do you think that there are kind of a subset of players, even maybe a subset of like the higher echelon players that see the way kind of Tibbs has these guys going about their business and has leaders on the floor, like you mentioned, Brunson, Randle, all the way down the line, that looks at what the Knicks are doing here and uses that as maybe part of the reason that they would want to come and be a part of this?
I don't know. I'd be guessing, speaking for guys, but I know guys who are here don't complain about the minutes. Okay. Guys who aren't playing big minutes are asking for the minutes, but they're not there to be had. I think, and these guys, I've said this for a decade now. It's guys talk in the league. They summer together. They work out together with similar trainers for agencies. I thought that was Phil Jackson's biggest mistake was, trying to alienate and mistreat Carmelo Anthony, who might have been the most popular player in the league at the time, among players. He's just a beloved guy. Every city we go to, guys hugging him, love him. He was just that guy, and Phil made it a toxic place for him, which became toxic. New York became toxic for other players who didn't want to be a part of that and join in what Phil was doing. I think that's changed, and Thibodeau's a part of this current group, and so I think you have to give him some credit or not blame, the other way. I don't think players think, I guess there has been one or two we've heard, where there's some. There was a poll last year of players, and Thibodeau, I think, topped the guys I wouldn't want to play. But look, they hear him from the other sideline, and look, we're not in practices anymore like we used to be, but we were, and I know the voice, and I talk to referees and everything about it, and he's actually a pretty well-liked guy around the league, among players, among refs, among coaches. We hear the bark and the growl and stuff, but I think outside of that, he's actually pretty well liked.
That's good to know. A couple more about this team, and then a few more general things, and I promise I'll get you out of here. You mentioned Quickley before. You mentioned that he wants to start. He went on the record with Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports earlier this year, and he said, "Eventually, I want to start." Do you get the sense that, I don't want to say that is he in their long-term plans? Like, do you think the Knicks are in his long-term plans? Maybe I'll phrase it that way. I mean, I know money talks, but what do you think?
I think it's got to be both sides, and that's sort of why I think that I could see him being moved this summer as much as anybody on the team, because he's a great value right now. He's an asset.
He's awesome.
I mean, look, do I think the Knicks, would they benefit from keeping him as a sixth man? Absolutely. You love to have a guy like that who's an energy guy, improved defensively this season in ways I never imagined, became a leader of that second unit defensively. I think he was a game changer for them, and just explosive scorer, all the things he did on the court, the communication. But all that said, he's a sixth man. He wants to be paid like a starter. You're going to have to start figuring out what that means to you cap wise, hard cap, double apron, whatever it's called now.
Lead apron. Yeah.
Right. It's insane. And it's going to restrict things you can do. And you've got to decide, would you rather have Quickley, or would you rather turn Quickley and 2 first rounders into what you believe is that guy who's going to get you to the next level? And look, we look at Miami's talent this year. I don't think it's any better than the Knicks talent. I think you can sort of match it up, and Jimmy Butler is awesome and amazing, and Bam is a great talent, and they have good players. But I don't think you look at them and say the Knicks couldn't do what they're doing. So with growth, could RJ and Quickley and Grimes, could you just keep this team intact, stability, grow together and be better? I think you can, but I don't think in the world of contracts and stuff, I think that's more what you have to think here is slots and what it's going to mean to you going forward. What Quickley's going to cost, and is he as tradable when you pay him $24 million a year? Is he as tradable as he is right now as an asset? Any team that's getting him knows they're going to extend him, and it's going to cost them.
Sure, yeah.
But you get a cheap season next year. I just think. And look, we never know what's going to happen. He could get hurt next year. He could struggle next year with the shooting. He has great value outside of this season. So I think that's an asset that is well thought of around the league that they can attach things to, and maybe even. I hate to say that you're using him to get rid of something else, but you might be able to use him to get rid of Fournier's contract if you want.
Yeah, I think Fournier is like a outgoing salary in a deal. It's but it's funny because of Fournier's comments. He sure seems to think he's going to be playing elsewhere next season,
which I agree with, and I understand why he said it. And he was a total pro the whole time. But I would ask him this: where? I think he has value. He is a good shooter, and he's a good guy to have in your locker room.
Not a 19 million.
It's a lot, right? It's a lot of money to pay for a guy who's just you can't play defensively.
Real quick on Barrett, how big do you think his playoff performance was for him, for the team? Or for the front office in terms of maybe how they view him? Any thoughts on that?
Look, I get asked by friends every day about these guys, and the one thing I say about Barrett is, whether it's the 1 for 10 last game or the games before that where he played really well, we talk about built for New York. He is unbothered by all of it. He's a no drama guy. Look, we can go back to the draft and how bad the Knicks felt falling number 3. But there's no John Morant. You will never find RJ Barrett waving a gun around in a strip club. At 4 a.m. That just doesn't happen. He's
and he plays unlike Zion.
Right, he plays and he's a professional. Which in New York, there's something to be said for that. That you never have to worry about him. So that's the floor that I put for him, is that he's a 20-point a game scorer who can handle New York. Which is no small feat.
No.
But I think, can he be better? He certainly has to be if he's going to be one of your core guys. It's obviously, I think it's no secret that Thibodeau has more belief probably in Quentin Grimes as that future guy. He basically took away the primary defensive assignment from Barrett and handed it to Grimes as a guy with a barely a half a season behind him. He was the guy this year, and I think they think he's going to become a good offensive player.
Grimes,
I think Grimes, yeah. So, but what we saw from Barrett, I think we saw a better defensive player in the postseason. I think we saw a guy who did the right things offensively, made the right passes. Do I think you can win with RJ Barrett as a starter? I absolutely do.
Sure.
I don't think he can be your star, but if he's your 4th guy, sure. The one guy I wonder about is the guy that is the defensive anchor, and we haven't mentioned, is Mitchell Robinson. And Thibodeau loves having a defensive rim protecting anchor. But at some point, do you say we cannot play 4-on-5 offensively anymore? It's got to be a guy who can give you something. Look, if you look back at the tape of the last couple of games, Julius made, I think I counted 4 passes where he penetrated, drew double, triple teams, and slipped a pass through traffic, and Mitch bobbled the ball or couldn't get it up to the rim. If that's, obviously if you flip it up to the rim, his finishing is elite, but you've got to have a guy who can do more than that. And that's where the temptation to pay $50-something million for Karl Anthony Towns and have him be your 5 and completely lose that defense is tempting, but you better come up with some defensive game plan if that's your team.
We're watching. Look at the Final Four. Who's playing center? Nikola Jokic, somewhat talented basketball player. Anthony Davis, somewhat talented basketball player. Bam Adebayo, somewhat talented basketball player. And even Boston, but they could toggle between all these different. Whether it's Horford, obviously not in his prime anymore, but could do a lot of things offensively. Rob Williams is like a version of Mitch, but even that's a disservice to Robert Williams, because Robert Williams could catch a ball, could make a pass, could he could do some different things. So
yeah. And I would say that the Knicks comp to Jokic is never going to be Mitchell. I think their comp is Jalen Brunson. He does offensively I hate to say he's a foot shorter, but he does the same things offensively. He can, amazing moves in the paint and can find guys out of it and create his own shot and break your heart. I think Mitchell has you got to get something, and I don't see where they ever will. Look, I've seen him as a rookie when we used to see more practice, and I've seen him do the work, and I just don't see it ever happening. No, and I just don't think, I don't know how you live it. And look, we talk about Jokic. I think Jokic should have been the MVP, and he's the greatest offensive talent probably in the game. He's not a good defensive player. He's a liability defensively. And somehow Mike Malone hides that and makes it work. And I think, could Thibodeau make it work with a lesser defensive player? I think he probably could. And I mean, look, that's not a defensive team that I'd want to count on if you say threw Towns in there in his place. But boy, it would certainly open things up offensively.
It sounds like you. Do you think that they're going to make? Is that the guy they're going to make the play for?
I don't. I just look. I hear the name so much that I kind of think in my head about it. But I think, look, do I want to pay Karl Anthony Towns $60 million? I was
about to say
in his last year. It's crazy. But look, that's what everybody's going to be getting paid. Look, that's what Jalen Brunson's going to be getting.
I was about to say,
and Julius is going to be getting that if you want to keep these guys. So those are the decisions when we say make a move. It's not just, does this guy make our team better? It's, this guy's going to be really expensive. How are we going to work this out? Do we want to pay Julius Randle $55 million or whatever it's going to be? Those are decisions they're going to have to make. And I know they've got a front office full of voices doing it. So somebody's in there figuring out how to make it
work. Brock Aller, hard at work. 3 quick ones, and then I got to get you out of here. Who's your favorite player to ever interview in Knicks locker room?
Wow. Look, Carmelo was amazing to deal with. Day in, day out, amazing. Just first of all, he's a fun guy. He's he was a great guy to deal with. Just, he was the guy who, whatever chaos was going on, he was willing to address it honestly. Look, you've been in their press room. It's the silence is golden there at the Garden. And Carmelo was a guy Carmelo is a guy they could not and would not control. So I love dealing with Carmelo. I thought he was great. And I'll say this, the group now are a pretty fun bunch of guys. Josh Hart is great to deal with. Jalen, the one thing, look, I've told this to their management, to their PR people, the dumbest thing they ever did was not having a press conference with Jalen Brunson, because he will never, ever in his life say that something that gets him in trouble or the team in trouble. Super smart guy, smarter than anyone in the building, probably. But I think, RJ is the same thing. They trot RJ out there every day because RJ, again, was groomed for this from the time he was a small child. Groomed for interviews and handling New York and all that. And so I think this is a pretty good group to deal with. Again, aside from the interview room, they're fun, a fun group and a good guy. Mitch is a lot of fun. One of my favorite players ever to deal with was PJ Brown. who was maybe the nicest person.
I was about to say
the nicest guy I've ever met, which a Knicks fan wouldn't probably appreciate. But I covered him with the Nets when he first came in the league.
Sure, yeah,
super guy, yeah. But look, we've had a good bunch of guys and coaches. Van Gundy was great to deal with, and Tom, other than the grumbling, is a pretty good guy.
You answered my second question, I think, already. I was going to ask you think Melo should have his jersey retired?
That's a tough one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
no favoritism from you, from the guy you love covering. Okay.
No, I don't. Look, I didn't cover, but I covered Willis Reed as a GM and know what kind of guy he was and the legend he was. And so to me that's the bar when you're getting these top guys. Sure. So now I start wondering is Melo really a Denver guy? Is he a New York guy? They didn't win. I don't put that on a guy. Look, to me, throw them both up there. Throw him and Bernard up there, and you settle all the arguments. And they're greats. And Carmelo, again, he had his critics inside and outside the organization, but he was the face of the franchise on a franchise that hadn't had a face in a while. He was the superstar player who was out there every day at the podium talking. So to me, that's worth something. And the guy's in the record books for a lot of things for them.
Very last one. Do you have a favorite moment covering the team at the Garden?
Boy. Linsanity was a lot. Yeah, look, Linsanity was a lot of fun. And you knew it was a temporary thing. I think the Harvard education in him was knowing when to cash in. Sit out the postseason that year, cash in. But he, you'd watch it every night. Everywhere we went, it was an amazing show. You knew you were watching something that the entire nation was riveted on. Again, I'm old enough. I covered the '94 finals. I was there the night of the OJ chase. So I've had a few. But you just love it when it's a good game and a good environment. You like it when it's like it was this year when the crowd was into it and it was winning and it was fun. Again, I know Berman has probably been on here defending himself a few times that people think it's negative, and I say this. We try and write what's happening, and if it's a 17-65 team, you have to write it's a 17-65 team. If they're a 50-win team, you write it that way. And I think when they're a 54-win team, we wrote glowing stories that help get awards for guys. When it's not that, you have to be honest and write what's happening, and not just be a fan. So that look, it's I think this group will go down that way, and I don't think we've seen the high end of this group yet. I just feel like youth, Quentin Grimes is a guy they believe in. I believe in. I think is going to take another jump. Could he become a Mikal Bridges type? Maybe. We've seen hints of what he can do offensively. This is a guy that was a point guard in high school, yep. And obviously an elite shooter. I think if they stand pat, they get better. I think this group gets better as they are. So we'll see. But I see that I sound more positive than most fans. So.
You're two things that I'll say goodbye. One, a lot of fans who listen to the show, a few come to mind in particular, are going to be hearing what you talk about in terms of trying to keep this group together and just letting them grow. And it's going to be music to their ears. And number two, regarding, fans thinking you guys are too hard on the team. I was one of those fans back in the day who, like, whether it's you or Steph or Mark or whoever saying something negative, and now I'm the one who, when I write my newsletters or I say something on a podcast, and I'll get people in my mentions or DMs or Substack comments be like, how could you say this about this play? I'm like, I'm just saying what I'm seeing. I promise you, it's not personal. And I'm like, and I occasionally think back to when I used to get annoyed at you guys and be like, man, the world is a funny place. How things what goes around comes around. But so you guys are great. That's what I tell most critics. If you want, go to journalism school and come do it and work your way up, and I'd be happy to hand this over.
It's tea time for me now.
No,
I was never jealous of Mark Berman before this season.
Oh, what is Mark doing right now? It's probably standing in the I don't know, maybe under an umbrella on a golf course as it's downpouring.
I've seen him a couple times this season, and he looks great. He's looking happily retired.
Listen, he got away so the Knicks could win. It was his sacrifice. That's the reason why the Knicks were good this year. No, Steve Popper, you're a legend, man. Seriously, thank you. Thank you for all of your off-air kindnesses over the years to me personally. It truly can't thank you enough. And we're lucky to have you. Don't hold off on the tea times. You got to do this for another few years at least.
Got a couple more years.
Thanks again, man.
Anytime, guys.